So welcome to the Streamside Landowner Workshop today with Snohomish Conservation District and Snohomish County Surface Water Management. My name is Brianna, and I will be speaking to start. And we also have a few other speakers as well today. And I have everyone's contact information up on the screen here. Our webinar is being recorded today, so you can access this contact information later on. We will be sending out the link to that recording later on. Next. So for today's Streamside Landowner webinar, we will be covering how streams function, why their function may be impacted, and actions that you can take to positively impact your stream and watershed health. But before we start with our topic, we have a few other things to cover first. So first of all, what is a conservation district? At Snohomish Conservation District, we offer free technical assistance and financial assistance to landowners in Snohomish County and Camino Island, and we work with rural and urban residents to improve habitat, soil health, productivity, and more. And you can see here some of the other services that we offer. Next. So today, please feel free to ask questions. I would ask that you please use the Q&A function on Zoom down in that bottom row to ask those questions. We will answer those as we are able to. We have a lot of content to get through today, so it's possible that we might not reach every single question. If we have any time at the end, we will come back to any that we haven't answered. And if we don't get to any, we will return to those questions on our field tour on Saturday. And if you would like captions while you are watching our webinar today, in the bottom right corner, there should be a button that says closed captions. You can click that on your own Zoom screen to have Zoom auto-populate some captions for you. Next. So like I said before, today's webinar is being recorded. Don't worry, your face and voice will not be recorded. Those are turned off. We will upload this on our YouTube channel. And I have the link to our YouTube channel here. We have other webinars uploaded on habitat restoration, living with beavers, natural yard care, and more. So if you are interested in any of those topics, I would highly recommend checking out our YouTube channel and watching those past webinars. And I will be sending out the link to this recording later on. Next. So on our Snohomish Conservation District website, we do have an events calendar that you can check out to stay up to date with what events we have coming up. And of course, our next event is this Saturday, our Streamside Landowner Field Tour, the second part to this event. So that will be from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. in Lake Stevens, and we would welcome you all to come. So today we will be hearing from a few different speakers. We're going to hear from Thomas Bultice, James Lauder, and Alex Pittman. And I will hand it over to you, James.
All right, welcome. So we are going to go over kind of a very brief how streams function, looking at their hydrology, morphology, ecology, and then kind of the impacts that you can have on those systems. And actually, Thomas will dive a little bit deeper into those topics. So first, we're going to start off with hydrology. So next slide, please. You have all probably seen this graphic, the water cycle, probably very familiar. Precipitation in the form of rain and snow fall and then go into our streams, rivers, or groundwater, flow into our oceans and seas, and along that process will evaporate and then continue in that cycle. What we're really concerned about here is snow. A lot of our stream systems are majority snow-fed, but that is changing. Next slide, please. So what we're seeing in recent trends is both that we're having less snow in our winters. You probably are all aware that we are in a current drought condition. We have about 64% of our regular snowpack, and that's becoming a trend. In addition to that, we're also seeing a retreat of our glaciers. This is the Nisqually Glacier on Rainier, and you can see between 64 and 2015, it has been moving further and further back. And so the combination of these two things, less snowpack on a year-to-year basis and a continual loss of both snow and glaciers, is leading to kind of a change in how our streams flow. Next slide, please. So these are some graphs and some graphics that are representing how that's changing. If you look on the left here, we have kind of a historical flow rates for streams in the Snohomish River. And so you can see that blue line, it's relatively level for most of the year, dipping down in the summer. But the red dotted line is what our prospective flows are going to look like. Higher flows in the winter and much lower flows in the summer as our snowpack, our precipitation changes from snow to rain. So we're going to have kind of these what we call flashier systems where our water is coming more intensively in shorter periods. That also means that our floods are going to look a little bit different. So the graphic on the right is kind of a representation of what our floods are going to look like. Again, blue is our historic, where we have more smaller floods, and our extreme flood events, like the one in January 8th, is looking around 100,000 CFS. But in the future, a big flood like that is going to start becoming more averages. And then we're going to get even larger floods, even bigger impacts. But what does that mean? We can go to the next slide. This kind of jumps into, some other stuff. Just a couple more points of data is if you look at this is kind of a description of what we're seeing right now. Higher rain intensity, lower summer precipitation. We're switching from a snow-dominated rain or the stream system into a rain-dominated stream system, along with a couple of other facts that we're looking at. Next slide. And so all these things are starting to affect how streams interact with the landscape. Our normal kind of stream profile, what it looks like is similar to this. This is actually a river up in Alaska, but it is a really nice representation of what streams do. They cross across this floodplain, many braided channels, and they move. And so down here in the Puget Sound, we have very similar systems where our streams will move across the floodplain and they'll change. And because we're having these flashier systems, we're seeing this movement happen on a shorter time scale. Next slide, please. So right here we have the South Fork Still Squamish. This is just a little bit north of Arlington. And so this is a project that we're actually working on there. And so here we have the stream. The main channel itself is running off to the west with a side channel going kind of through Main Center. And Alex, I'm going to have you kind of click through these a little bit quickly. So we'll go to the next slide. You can see here that the stream itself, sometime between 2001 and 2007, has switched over into that side channel very quickly. A large flood happened during that time, completely abandoning the side channel. Next slide. And as over the next couple of years, it starts to rebraid and stabilize a little bit. Next slide. Kind of establishing itself. We're seeing growth on that left-hand side of the screen. Next slide, please. And one more. But in 2020, we can start to see it's eroding out on this property, pushing further out to the east. And next slide. In the next 3 years, 2021, 2022, we can see that it's actually removed quite a lot of the stream bank. And so you can see in 20 years, we've kind of had a complete change of where the system is. And although a stream can be stable for 10, 20 years, we can see in 2 to 3 years, a lot of land lost and a lot of movement. And that's kind of what our streams are doing. It's just exacerbating by the change in our hydrological regime. We can hop to the next slide, please. And so what does that mean? There are some significant impacts both on animals and humans. One of the major impacts that is present today is our impact on salmon. Next slide. Kind of going back to the point I was talking about before with our loss of snowpack and glaciers. In the past, we had much more snow, which allowed longer inputs of cold water into our systems. And so back in the 60s, we had lower snowpacks, lower freezing levels, higher water flows in the summer and colder temperatures. Now it's lower and warmer, and it's projected to continue along that trend. Next slide. In addition, these flashier systems are causing more erosion. And not only does that impact the fish, but it also impacts people. Again, we have erosion on a property, but it's also impacting structures. and buildings. On the right-hand side, you can see a bridge that's starting to erode out in a relatively small stream system, much smaller than the Still-Squamish. Next slide. And this erosion puts a lot of sediment into the system, which does impact our fish as well and many other species. For salmon specifically, they require clean gravel to breed. And so you can see here, there's some alvin and reds. And if they get covered in sediment, it will actually suffocate them and they'll die. So it's really important to be able to stabilize these streams. Next slide. So this brings us to some of the basic benefits of being able to do a little bit of management in these systems. So I'm going to run through these 5 benefits that we can add, and Thomas is actually then going to address some of these much more in depth in some case studies that we have in the French Creek watershed. Next slide. So shade is really important. This is actually the same stream. It's taken, the photo on the right is taken from upstream and the photo from below is taken from downstream. This is Fry Creek. In 2001, we did a planting project. So beforehand, it was an open pasture, a lot of exposure to the sun. And then now this last photo was taken in 2022, you can see we have a lot more cover coming in. And what that does is it allows for cooler stream temperatures, and that's very beneficial for the fish, as you saw those raising temperatures come up. Next slide, please. Also, bank stability. This photo on the left is from that same property we are looking at the aerials from. They're seeing some massive loss of land, essentially. But we can stabilize that by adding in more plants. And you can see in a smaller system, it actually holds true even more. This system has some undercutting in it, and by adding in all of these additional roots of specific plants, we can help stabilize those and prevent the loss of both land and too much sediment input into these systems. Next slide, please. Filtration is also a large benefit. This is another project we're working on in Camino Island. And you can see in the background along that hill, that's actually part of a farm. This is all on a farm with a creek running through it. This buffer is 35 to 50 feet wide, and it helps to catch all that agricultural runoff that is coming into the stream and making sure it stays cleaner, avoids contaminants coming into this area. Next slide, please. Nutrient inputs are also really important, less beneficial for us, but really beneficial for the environment. And essentially what that's saying is leaf and detritus will fall into the stream and feed invertebrates and other small animals that then are fed on by larger animals and eventually fish and orca. So allowing things to fall into the stream, organic matter to accumulate, is a really beneficial impact of doing restoration and plantings along stream sides. Next slide. And finally, woody debris. So woody debris is kind of another step up. It increases channel complexity. So this picture on the left is natural woody accruement that has happened within, this is in West Fork Woods Creek. But you can also, if you have the time and space, you can add in large woody debris into the systems too. And that allows for the creation of different habitat types. It allows for meandering. And all these little niche environments are really important, especially for salmon and other fish that require these systems. So although I've run through these benefits really, really quickly, I'm now going to pass it off on to Thomas, who's going to show you some of these practices actually happening in Woods Creek itself.
All right. Well, thank you, James. That was a really good introduction, and I appreciate the the kind of focus on introducing complexity to the streams, but also that our streams are changing, and giving that high level overview is really important. But what we want to do now is kind of make this real for our watershed. So I'm going to focus on the French Creek watershed, and we're going to maybe hopefully paint a picture of one project that we have been working on, and how does that move into some sort of example that you can use on your properties or the places that you go and visit where you experience the stream. Where can you start identifying kind of what are the limitations and what are the opportunities for habitat, water quality, and salmon habitat. All that is to say is that we're going to be focused on riparian vegetation and how we can enhance a system with riparian vegetation. And I do understand and want to recognize that's not the only thing that you might be doing on your Streamside property. To us, that is the first and best way to start to restore and enhance these systems to try and accommodate kind of changing systems like James was talking about. Over time, we're seeing changing systems. And kind of the riparian area, the streams, the wetlands that are associated with them are some of the best ways for us to create resilient systems that we don't feel the impacts of changing stream systems, changing precipitation. We don't feel that as much when we have very strong and resilient riparian systems. So that's what I'll focus on. And then Alex, after we'll talk about some of the actions that you might be taking near or around your stream and what kind of the regulatory framework around that will be. So I'm going to focus on the riparian vegetation in French Creek with one site in particular. So French Creek, if you're not aware, is kind of sits between Snohomish, city of Snohomish and city of Monroe. If you're driving east on Highway 2 from Snohomish towards Monroe, you're driving through a lot of farmland. And so on the south side of Highway 2, you'll see a lot of farmland, and then on the north side you'll see kind of some forested, kind of urbanized forested area, and that is 28 square miles of French Creek, which includes 115 miles of stream. So there's a lot of little streams and tributaries and drainages packed in this 28 square miles. So when we think 28 square miles isn't very much, well, there's a whole lot of space within that watershed that can use improvement, and most of these spaces are moderately to very intensely developed. So 20% of the watershed is in city of Monroe. The rest is unincorporated Snohomish County, where we have pasture land and farmland, highly intense agriculture in the diking district. And all this has an impact, which has led to low dissolved oxygen in the stream, which has negative impacts on our fish, high temperatures, which has negative impacts on most biotic life. And then we have high bacteria concentrations in certain portions of the watershed, which usually is stemming from agricultural uses, including livestock, and kind of how are we managing the manure and the nutrient inputs from the mud and manure that moves into the stream. So we have limited riparian vegetation and some highly managed systems that are creating some negative impacts in the watershed that we have tried to recruit projects to try and solve for. And so maybe you can see some parts of your properties in the next example that we go through. Next slide. So here's a quick map of our project area. And we were called by the landowner to this project, and the landowner had questions and they wanted a free site visit, and we were happy to provide that for them. And when we got there, what we saw was working land. We saw livestock, we saw pasture, remnant pasture, and then we saw this stream coming through. The stream that you see on the map is not French Creek proper, but it is a tributary that flows into French Creek less than a mile downstream. So very well connected. And this is one of those unnamed tributaries that creates that over 100 miles of stream in the watershed. So we have wetlands, we have evidence of beavers, and there's livestock. And so we're managing the landowner's use of the property with a riparian habitat where we are aiming to keep it as healthy as possible while still accommodating the uses that this landowner had bought the property for and wanted to spend their life making a small homestead with animals, with pollinators. And so how do we match those desires and come up with an outcome that is good for the riparian habitat and it's good for the landowner as well? Next slide. So what do you see here? This is the same property, but the imagery has changed. And what we're seeing here is the LiDAR imagery, which is essentially showing the bare ground elevation model. And what that means is the darker areas on this map are lower and the lighter areas are higher elevation. And it's not by much. This is a matter of maybe 10 to 20 feet between the lightest and the darkest. But what you're seeing is the lower spots is where water flows. And so when we go out to this property, we see what we can see with our eyes, but we also go back and we say, where is water flowing? what is the morphology of this site? How has the water flowed through this site over time, and how does the land dictate where the water goes? And then because the land is where it is and the water is flowing in a certain pattern, we start to see a hydrology of over the winter and the summer. The hydrology is showing us when water is high, where is it likely to go? Where is it likely to back up? And then in the summertime, when it's the driest, where are we going to still have wet areas? Probably those darker areas are the wettest, and the lighter areas will probably dry out more. And so this is how we start to understand the opportunities for enhancement. There's a few barriers to this. And one of those is you see these little purple dots, and those are crossings over waterways. On the right side, you see a ditch that has a crossing over it, which is probably a barrier to fish. So fish are probably not using that ditch. But on the left side, you see another barrier. And in that spot is the location of a beaver dam, which we'll see a photo of in just a second. But there's beavers on this site, and they are affecting how the water flows, and they're backing up water. And we'll spend a little bit of time on beavers in a moment. But I want to just mention that this is a stream system that is connected upstream and downstream, and each component, whether it's a crossing, beavers, the way the depth of the ponds, or and the kind of the topography on site, is really determining how water is moving. And so when you see a straight line on the map, this blue line is not really indicative of how water is flowing. We really need to understand our sites to see how our streams and wetlands are actually moving across the property. Next slide. So this landowner has animals. They have a range of sheep and alpacas and llamas, and a few in between. When a llama and an alpaca mate, they make another animal, and there's some of those as well. So these animals graze. They use a lot of the pasture land that's on site, and they potentially could have a negative impact on the riparian area if they have access to it. Turning up the soil, increasing the sediment inputs to the stream is not great for water quality, but then they're pooping in the stream, or they're pooping nearby the stream, and we want to keep them away from that, because that nutrient input, James mentioned positive nutrient inputs from a lot of vegetation in the stream. Negative nutrient inputs are things like chemicals and fertilizers and mud and manure that is actually creating an imbalance of the chemical properties of the water, thereby negatively affecting the habitat for biotic life. And so we want to avoid that. So that's one consideration on this property. Next slide. So we are planning on improving and enhancing this property. And before work, we call this phase 0. What do we do first? And phase 0 is understanding what we're seeing. And so when I look at this picture, a few of the things that I'm seeing, I would take a poll if we were in person, but what I'm seeing here is a lot of grass. And this grass is actually reed canary grass, which is an invasive species. So I take note of that right away. I take note of this pond. What is this pond telling me? Something's backing up the water in the stream. I see some of this dead wood, the standing dead wood that is indicative of flooding. These trees were probably flooded out at some point and they couldn't survive anymore, but are also creating great habitat features, and eventually falling into the stream are going to create that habitat complexity through having large wood in the stream channel. But right now you can't really see a channel. So what we want to do is to find the channel, identify it, and then try and create some overhanging vegetation to start reducing the temperature inputs and start to filter out the nutrients that are coming from the livestock. Next slide. So here is a picture of the dam, and you can see it moving across the stream here. This is the dam that's creating the pond you saw in the last picture. And behind the dam, you can see a little bit of the culvert in the grass. That's a culvert going under the crossing by the dam. And so we have two impediments to fish passage, and also two ways that the culvert trying to increase water flow and the beavers capitalizing on this pinch point in the stream are actually backing up water and creating habitat. And when we talk about beavers, we do not really want to remove them because they create a lot of good habitat features. I'll mention those in a moment. So we're not trying to remove the dam, we're trying to work with and coexist with this beaver habitat and trying to create a wetland stream complex that is ecologically very functional. Next slide. So the first phase of any sort of riparian revegetation and enhancement is kind of understanding what weeds are on site and how do you prepare the site for the most successful planting. And what this means is understanding what weeds are out there is knowing the species of the weed, but also when does it like to grow, and then what's going to stress that weed out. So controlling weeds is going to be a process of understanding which plant is on site, and also what is the best way to control that. And there's a lot of different methods for doing that, ranging from removing it by hand, covering it up with weed cloth. There's chemical controls that we can consider. And all of these have different pros and cons, and they vary weed to weed. So it's not like you can go grab a chemical and spray everything and it'll all be a good control method. It doesn't work that way. So we need to be strategic. And if you ever want help with controlling weeds on your property, please call into Alex at the county or anyone at the conservation district. We can help you decide and make a plan for controlling weeds in kind of a responsible and effective way. And then sometimes you have degraded soils. You're in a highly modified property that maybe soils need to be amended, and you have to remove some sort of trash or pollutants from your kind of riparian floodplain area before you put in native plants. Some of this removal may or may not require a permit to remove things from the stream or the stream side. So the asterisk here about removing hazards and pollution is if you have something in the stream or around the stream, contact the conservation district or Snohomish County. Alex can tell you if it's something that would need a permit. But if you're just controlling weeds, you don't need a permit. Alex can talk more about that later. But the first thing you have to do is create a good space for native plants to grow so that when you create and invest in a plan, it's going to be successful and your investment is worthwhile. Next slide. Next, we have planting. So this is back to our project site where we had a big kind of wetland area where we put in all these sticks. So on the left, you see a photo of a bunch of sticks in the ground, and these are actually planted trees. And so there's several species of trees where if you cut the branches off and you poke them in the ground, they have specialized cells that can actually grow roots underground, and then they grow branches above ground. So this is one method of planting. These are your willow species, some dogwood species, and cottonwood. So this is a highly effective way to control very aggressive grass like reed canary grass in wetland type plantings. So this is one strategy we use to try and get some cover over the stream right away, because as you can see, the stream flowing through here does not have any cover, which means the sun is just baking this in the summer, and we want to make sure we have some sort of shade when those hot summer months come around. And then on the right side, you see some of our more upland further away from the stream. We have a few trees. They're hard to see because these trees that we plant are very small. They're seedlings. They're not more than a year or 2 years old. And so this is a picture of what it might look like after we control all the blackberry. You can see some of the blackberry slash that's underneath these little plantings. And then you have these little plants that are coming up. And we're going to get to the maintenance phase in a second. But this is kind of the most fragile that this planting will ever be. And so as you consider putting in plants and they look really small and they look puny, you're still on their team and you're still going to have to care for them because they are the most fragile and the most susceptible to damage as they ever will be in the first 1 or 2 years. Next slide. All right, so currently we have a summer photo here of a planting, and this planting is taking off. It is successful, but plants grow slowly, and the kind of restoration that we're talking about, the enhancement of our stream sides, takes time and it takes patience. And so if you need help making a plan that's going to take into account the full commitment that you might be making and how to best manage your time and resources, we would love to help you do that and kind of game plan what that might look like on your property. Because as you can see, the grass is growing up and the trees are not very tall. And so there's still competing demands on these plants. Something else I want you to notice is on the top left corner, you can see a fence that's running by. And we installed this fence on the edge of our project area because when the summertime comes around and the pastures grow tall and the landowner needs places for his animals to graze, he's sending them down right adjacent to our property. If those animals are coming into the planting area, they are more than likely damaging our plants because our plants are growing and they're happy and they're very attractive forage for a lot of animals. And so we like to exclude them from the planting area, not only to keep them from moving manure into the stream system, but also from damaging the investment we made with our riparian plantings. Next slide. So here's another photo of all those sticks in the ground that I showed before they had any leafy vegetation growing on them. Here you can see those sticks with branches coming out. And so these grow very quickly, which is why they, in a couple years, will create some really good shade over the stream and start competing with the grasses very quickly. Next slide. What we found on this site in particular, that when we planted all of these nice sticks and these nice willow trees, that the beavers had a buffet. They really enjoyed that, and we supported beaver habitat for better and worse, right? We lost some of our native vegetation, but on the flip side, we are creating better beaver habitat. And why do I say that is maybe a good thing? The beaver dam that you see here is impounding a lot of water. When the stream comes in and it hits the beaver dam and it's backing up water, we're keeping water in the floodplain and we're keeping it on site. So instead of this water draining all the way out right away, we hold that water and we slow the time it takes for this water to make it all the way out to the ocean. And this means as that water sits here and it filters into the ground, it stays cold and it filters out pollutants, and it slowly moves its way down to the main stem of the Snohomish. And when it does that, we have cold water, but it's moving slower underground, which means it's taking longer for it to get there. And so in the summer, when our water levels go down and they get really hot, we still have this cold water underground that keeps bubbling up and keeps keeping our water much colder than if it just stayed on the surface. Next slide. So after we plant, we have to do a lot of maintenance, and part of your plan on any planting that you would do is understanding what maintenance is necessary. And that goes back to first, what invasive species are competing. What did you have to take care of before you planted is going to be a really good start. But sometimes when we take out all the blackberry or we cut down all the grass and we plant new native vegetation, we sometimes get to a resurfacing seed bank of weeds that we didn't know were there, and they were just waiting for some sort of space and sunlight to come up. So you need to pay attention to these properties and these projects, because as we plant and we disturb the soil just a little bit, other weeds might be coming up. So weed maintenance is probably the first and foremost thing you can do for successful planting. But maybe you live in a dry area and you have access to water, and watering some of your plants is going to be beneficial. And you know your properties well enough to know, is this drying out really quickly? Are these plants water stressed? And if you have the capacity to do some watering, it can be very beneficial. You also can expect a fair amount of mortality. Not every plant you put in the ground is going to live and be happy. This is part of the trial and error of finding the right plant for the right location. We would love to help you by sending you plant lists, which we plan to do, but also talking through what plants might be the right plants for your space, depending on the shade considerations. How much sun, how much shade, how much water, and what kind of soils are on your site is all going to impact what kind of plants you end up choosing. You can start to refine what plants are on site by just understanding what's living, what is thriving, and then what's not doing so well, and then adaptively managing that so the next time you put some more plants out there, you're not doing the same thing twice, but you're trying to focus on the plants that do well, and try and create vegetation that is going to thrive. And you can see that on site if you pay attention and you do proper weed control. Next slide. So with all of this, with the site preparation, all this planting, what are we achieving? We put in fencing, we did a dense willow planting closer to the stream, we had an upland pasture planting, which is the lighter color on the map, and then we did an understory planting in the dark green colors. All of that was planned strategically to try and maximize what we're going to get out of this project. So number one, we are shading out the stream and reducing the thermal loading in the summer months, which means if the sun's not hitting the stream, it's not heating up in the same way, and we're keeping colder water in the stream for longer, which makes fish happier, and most other biotic life is happier with the cooler water. The exclusion fencing, like I said before, is keeping mud and manure out of the stream, and so that's keeping our water clear and clean, and it's also preventing excess bacteria from growing and eating all this nutrients, which in turn reduces the oxygen the dissolved oxygen in the stream. So we're increasing the dissolved oxygen by keeping the mud and manure out. Our upland pasture planting is more diverse than the willow planting, and it can allow for some taller trees to provide that long-term habitat complexity. And it's also providing space for us to plant more diverse pollinator species so that we can have a lot of different flowering species that are going to support pollinators, insects, that are going to support the whole kind of habitat diverse project as a whole. So lastly, long-term invasive species control is just going to ensure that in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, that we have a very structurally and species diverse riparian planting that is going to improve water quality and also support what the landowner is trying to do on their property. It's going to keep him from negatively impacting the stream and help him to responsibly manage his animals on his site. Next slide. So I'm going to pass this off to Alex, but I did a lot of focus on kind of the riparian vegetation, and that is one tool that you have to improve the stream side on your property. But there's a few other ways that I did not focus on that Alex can introduce here.
Awesome. Thank you, Thomas and James. That's great kind of introduction and overview of kind of how these stream systems function naturally, kind of how they've been impacted and continue to be impacted. And then Thomas kind of tying together all those principles, kind of how we approach restoring our streams and what that really looks like on the ground. I'm going to quickly touch on a few other actions that these are things that really apply to everybody, you know, because everybody on the landscape, because everybody's property ultimately drains into our waterways. Everybody's in a watershed, but they hold particular weight with you as streamside landowners because your property, just because of your proximity to the stream, you're really the last line of defense. So what you're doing on your property, kind of irrespective of you know, the habitat restoration or riparian vegetation condition, really matters. So I'm going to go through these relatively quickly. There are going to be some links. They're mostly referring to other programs at the county, at the conservation district, and we're also going to be sending some follow-up resources within the next few days, and all of the information and links for these programs will also be in that. So don't worry if you didn't catch one of the links or anything like that. But I'm going to quickly kind of talk through a few of these other things to consider when you're thinking about kind of caring for and protecting the stream on your property. The first is to maintain your septic system. Properly built and maintained septic systems are designed to protect groundwater and our surface water resources. They're designed to, you know, filter out, clean out those pollutants before they reach our resources. So it's really important if you're on a septic system to be properly kind of taking care of that system and make sure it's functioning as it's intended to. To support you, your efforts to do that, the county's health department has what's called the Savvy Septic Program. It provides county residents with a number of resources to help. One is rebates for inspections, pumpings, installing risers, which are basically what you see in that picture there, the plastic with the green lids, so that it makes maintenance easier because they don't have to dig down every time, and for minor septic repairs that might come up. For larger system replacements or major repairs, the program also offers grants for income eligible residents, and if you're not eligible for a grant, they do also have partners that offer low interest loans to help you get those projects done so your system can get back up into a functional state. They also offer a free online workshop to help homeowners learn about how to care for septic systems and how they function, which is super helpful, especially if don't know anything about it. A lot of people, it's a totally new topic. And so understanding how it works and how best to take care of it is really valuable thing to take a few minutes to learn how to do. And that workshop also gets you eligible for receiving the rebates mentioned earlier. So again, we'll send out a link, but it's savvyseptic.org for all the information on that program. So that's human waste, and then there's also animal waste to manage, because as Thomas mentioned in that kind of case study, animal waste is definitely something that can have an impact on our water resources. So for pet waste, it's pretty simple. Pet waste can contain a lot of contaminants that are really difficult to compost out and filter out. So the recommendation is to simply scoop it, bag it, and trash it. If you have livestock, which is something that Thomas was talking about, obviously Thomas talked about excluding them from streams. And then in addition to folks like James and Thomas from the Conservation District tonight, who are really focused on habitat restoration and stream function, SCD also has a whole team of farm planners that can also visit your property for free and offer recommendations and connect you with resources to help you kind of manage your property and keep they have a number of resources that can help you manage manure effectively, both to help maintain the health of your animals and to ensure that pollution is excess pollution is not running off into our waterways. Another one I'll point you to is to find rainscaping solutions. So rainscaping is a pretty new program at the county. And for context, so a rainscape is essentially a landscape that allows rainwater to soak into the ground rather than running off. It's akin to what Thomas was just talking about with beaver ponds. You know, historically, we've when we're managing stormwater, we've really tried to pipe things and get them into concrete pipes and out to streams as fast as possible. And that's really caused a lot of the problems that Thomas and James were talking about earlier. So we're really looking for opportunities to let rainwater soak into the ground, get filtered out, and make it to our water resources more slowly. And so this includes rainscaping practices include a number of things like you see in the picture, rain barrels, rain gardens, but it also includes things as simple as using compost and mulch to improve our soil health so that it can soak in more water, protecting the outlets of our downspouts so they're not washing away, eroding soil into our streams as well. So again, these practices allow rainwater to soak into the ground. They can help improve drainage issues on your property, and they can help reduce the amount of polluted water leaving your property, and in your case, making it to the stream. Somewhat related is to practice natural yard care, which is another program that the county offers. So there's a number of natural yard care techniques like building healthy soil, smart watering, natural lawn care, choosing the right plants for your property. And those are all intended to help you grow healthy, beautiful yards and gardens that are also safer, use fewer resources, or less intensive for your family, pets, and the environment. So I went through those pretty quickly. And again, we'll have links to all those programs that we'll be sending out after the fact, but definitely something to think about as you think about kind of how to care for your streamside property. And I'm going to go ahead and switch gears now. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about regulations and permitting as relates to being working in and near a stream. So things that might be pertinent as a streamside landowner. It's a really big topic, can get really cumbersome and confusing. I'm also not with the county. I work for Snohomish County, but I'm not with the county's regulatory department. I'm with Surface Water Management. The regulatory department is Planning and Development Services. So I'm not in a regulatory role. The Conservation District is not a regulatory agency, but we have some familiarity with these regulations because we work with them so often, with streamside landowners so often. So I want to give you a little bit of context. So you have somewhat of a sense of the context and kind of what you may be looking at. So I'll give you my kind of take-home messages right up front. So one is that there are overlapping layers of regulations related to activities in and near streams that occur on both the local level, the state level, and the federal level. Basically, every level, there's different agencies that are basically looking at these issues from kind of different perspectives and have different regulations that apply or might not apply in certain cases. As expected, navigating those overlapping layers can certainly be challenging and confusing. So I would encourage you to reach out if you have site-specific questions, and we can hopefully point you in the right direction. Again, there's limits to kind of the specificity of what I might be able to answer, but we can certainly hopefully get you pointed in the direction that will be helpful to you if you're trying to sort something out. So again, there's these layers of regulations at the local level. at the state level, and at the federal level. For our purposes tonight, I'm really going to focus primarily on two of these at the local level and the state level. Critical areas regulations at the local level, and hydraulic project approval regulations at the state level with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So critical areas regulations. These are a set of regulations that are required by state law, but they're developed and administered at the local level to protect environmental resources. Critical areas is a relatively broad term that basically applies to a number of different types of natural resources or landscape features that are particularly sensitive to development. And different jurisdictions throughout the state, so different counties, different cities, different towns, have slightly different approaches to these and have slightly different considerations, different things on the landscape. So that's why they're developed and administered at the local level. So they're not the same statewide, but all jurisdictions are required to use best available science to develop them to make sure that those regulations are actually protecting the resources as intended. So again, there are many kinds of critical areas, but the ones most relevant to you as Streamside landowners are streams, wetlands, frequently flooded areas, wildlife conservation areas, and importantly, the buffers associated with them. So buffers are one of the key mechanisms by which these regulations protect these resources. And essentially, when a buffer is an area adjacent to this resource. So for a stream example, for example, you have that stream going through a property. A buffer is an area adjacent to the stream that is set aside as protected to buffer that resource, the stream, from impacts of development. So basically, can't be doing things that might damage the stream too close to the stream. Those things are kind of kept further back to protect the stream, to provide a buffer of those impacts. Stream buffers are relatively straightforward. So this table is taken directly from the county code. And you can see basically there's a range of 50 feet to 150 feet for what that stream buffer might look like, that protected buffer. 50 feet down at the bottom for streams that are non-fish bearing, either seasonal or flowing year round. As long as they're not fish bearing, it'll be 50 feet, up to 150 feet for fish bearing streams that have salmon in them. That's so those are pretty straightforward. Wetlands are another story, and I mention that just because it's not necessarily straightforward enough to just say, okay, I know where my stream is, I know 150 feet, I know I'm good here. Just because streams often have wetlands associated with them, like the case study is a perfect example. So there was a stream running through the system, but there are also low-lying areas kind of adjacent to it and around it that were very potentially kind of wetlands, which would have their own buffers associated with them. Not intended to be able to read this table at all. It's on here to basically illustrate how complex it can be. In contrast to that stream buffer table, wetlands are super complex, and there's lots of expertise basically required to figure out exactly what kind of wetland it is, what rating it is, what category it is, and exactly where a wetland lands on this table. And the buffers associated with wetlands range substantially more than they do with streams. So at the bottom, you can see the smallest wetland buffer in Snohomish County would be 25 feet up to a maximum of 250 feet. So it's a substantial range. I'm going to switch gears now and move over to the state level and talk about a hydraulic project approval, which is basically a permit requirement that's administered through the Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's definitely a slight oversimplification, but you can kind of think of critical areas regulations as primarily dealing with kind of what's going on adjacent to the stream, and an HPA primarily regulating kind of what goes on in and over and immediately adjacent to a stream. So state law, again, requires that project proponents obtain an HPA for any hydraulic work in or near state waters, and that includes most marine and fresh waters. And the purpose of that is to basically ensure that projects and construction are done in a manner that protects fish and their habitats. And that, again, doesn't necessarily mean that the action is something that the Department of Fish and Wildlife wouldn't otherwise welcome. Doing restoration work where you're improving the health of the stream by, putting in those large wood structures that were in some of the photos that James and Thomas showed earlier. Even doing that kind of work still requires this approval to make sure that the project design and the process for constructing it doesn't have any, unintended negative consequences. So kind of lumping those together, give a quick overview of kind of what kinds of activities in and around your stream are likely to require permits and which ones are not. So earth moving, if you're in that buffer or in the stream, so any excavation, fill, grading, dredging in the stream, that's all going to require, that's going to trigger kind of permit approvals. Outside of those buffers, these actions also might require permits, but there are thresholds. If you are only disturbing a certain amount of land, it might not require a permit until you get up to a certain threshold. Within those buffers, that threshold is essentially 0. So any amount of this triggers a permit process. Related, so clearing, removing trees, brush control, again, outside of these buffers, there are thresholds. Inside the buffers, the threshold is 0. Development, construction, so building things within those buffers. And then things like stream flow alteration, altering the stream bed or the bank, and stream crossing. So kind of, again, what I was just talking about, doing things in the stream, even like this kind of restoration work where they put a whole bunch of wood in the channel to improve stream function and habitat complexity, all of those still require permits. So even restoration practitioners working in streams often need to get these permits as well. And then stream crossings, so working over the channel, installing a culvert or a bridge or replacing one, those also trigger permit requirements. Activities not likely to require permits are, again, invasive species control, which Thomas talked about earlier. So there certainly are ways to go about invasive species control that would tip you over into a permit requirement, and that's kind of related to the last list. So if you're doing invasive species control by getting some giant equipment next to your stream and digging up all the earth and the invasive species with it, that would certainly also require a permit. But if you're using hand tools and power tools that you can operate by hand and mowing things down, that would not require a permit. On the flip side, installing native trees and shrubs is another thing that would not require a permit. And then there's a few in this category of kind of accessing and interacting with these buffers that don't require permits. So I have to work with a lot of people who think they have this regulatory protected buffer. They think they're not supposed to touch it, they're not supposed to go in it, they're not supposed to look at it. And that's certainly not the case. So you can have pedestrian access through these areas. You can have soft trails where you're not removing vegetation, just trimming branches and things like that to be able to access on foot. Passive recreation like fishing, things like that, foraging, picking berries or mushroom hunting, all of that is perfectly okay in these areas. And then one key exception to the permit requirement for removing trees or brush is that in the case of hazard trees. So there is an informal approval process there, but there's no required permit. And hazard trees are an interesting one that I get a lot of questions about. So if you have this situation, please feel free to reach out and I can kind of guide you through the process a little bit. The hazard trees are basically trees that are at particular risk of falling. So if they're dead, diseased, dying, leaning, and that if they were to fall, they would damage property or infrastructure, things like that. It's not just any old dead tree in the woods. It's ones that would actually damage something if they were to fall. So that's a quick overview of kind of what the regulatory landscape looks like. Again, there's a lot more complexity there, but that hopefully gives you a framework. And again, if you have specific questions about your property or a certain situation or project you might want to do, definitely don't hesitate to reach out and we can kind of point you in the direction as best we can. Now, I just wanted to spend a couple minutes kind of providing you a little bit more information about what kinds of support is out there to help guide Streamside landowners in their efforts to improve streams. So where do you go to find help if you want to take action on anything you learned tonight? Certainly, I would offer up both the Conservation District and Surface Water Management as really helpful resources. We put on these workshops because we want to be of service and help landowners like you connect you with the resources and recommendations you need to be equipped to take action. So in that vein, both of our organizations offer free site visits to discuss your questions, anything you want to on your property and issues specific to your property. Through a site visit like that, we're able to provide site-specific, clear recommendations on kind of what native plant species would thrive on your property, what the best options would be for controlling invasive species, and how we might go about, what the process for restoring the riparian area might look like on your property. I think Thomas's case study did a good job of illustrating that, there's lots of, there are straightforward kind of keystone pillars and kind of what that looks like, but the specifics of what that looks like in any given property or any given scenario, given the goals and the landscape, there's certainly quite a bit of variability in kind of how to proceed through those steps, and we can certainly help you navigate that. In some cases, both of our organizations are often also able to provide additional assistance to support your restoration efforts. My program provides free native plants to folks who live on streams, and in some cases, depending on the project or the situation, we're able to provide funding and crew support to restore riparian buffers. So that's certainly the case in the case study that Thomas spoke to. If you're interested in something like that, you can sign up for a site visit with either of us. There's going to be a workshop survey at the end of the webinar in just a little bit. There's an option to kind of indicate that you'd like a site visit there, or you can simply reach out to either of us. And again, all that information will also be in the follow-up email that we'll be sending out in a few days. So plenty of opportunity. If you have specific questions or want to talk about anything related to your stream on your property, we're certainly here to talk about anything and everything under the sun in that regard. So please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for. That said, as much as I encourage you to reach out to us, there are also a number of other organizations that can be of value to folks here. So locally in our county, there's a number of active nonprofit organizations that work in this area. So there's Sound Salmon Solutions, there's the Adopt a Streams Foundation, and the Wild Fish Conservancy. Sound Salmon, all of these organizations engage in stream restoration and habitat restoration projects in some form or fashion. Sound Salmon also does a lot with volunteer events and stewardship. They have a lot of programs both for youth and adult education that are really cool. Adopt a Stream similarly does a lot of public education work, and Wild Fish also does a lot of work kind of higher level, doing advocacy work and policy work, promoting responsible fisheries and habitat protection. Our local tribes are also really active in this space. So both the Tulalip tribe and the Stillaguamish tribe do a lot of habitat restoration work. They work with a lot of partners in that regard. They both do a lot of work with fisheries and acquiring priority properties for stream protection, kind of giving the streams more room to move, that kind of thing, especially on our larger river systems. And an interesting resource to note is also the Tulalip tribes has a really cool beaver relocation program. The Conservation District also has a really great beaver program to help you if beavers are part of your kind of stream system. The Conservation District has a great Living with Beavers program to help you kind of figure out tools and options to navigate that. And often that program works in conjunction in partnership with the Tulalip Tribes Beaver Relocation Program when it's not viable to coexist, and as was viable in the case that Thomas presented. There's also a number of state agencies that contribute to work in this regard, and maybe less so in the direct kind of contact with landowners, but all of these agencies provide important funding to programs like ours to do projects like the one Thomas talked about, to put on workshops like this. So the Department of Ecology, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Department of Natural Resources all kind of touch this space, but from slightly different angles. So the Department of Ecology is really focused on improving water quality and water quantity, and that often involves funding for riparian restoration projects, among other types of restoration efforts. Again, the Department of Fish and Wildlife is really focused on protecting and conserving wildlife. And so their HPA process regulates projects in and near streams to that end. The Department of Natural Resources is an interesting one because they actually own a lot of the stream beds. They're called state-owned aquatic lands. A lot of our streams are state waters, and they actually own the bottom of that stream. And so that's where they kind of have a nexus for doing work and providing funding for improving stream health. I think I'll hand it back off to Brianna.
All right, thank you so much, Alex, Thomas, and James. So we do have some time left over here for questions. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put that in the Q&A chat right now, and we will do our best to answer those questions here. While I'm waiting for you all to answer, or excuse me, to type in those questions, I just want to remind everyone that we do have our Streamside Landowner Field Tour coming up this Saturday, June 1st. That will be from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. in Lake Stevens. And that will be another opportunity to get specific questions about your property answered. So we would love to see you there, and please be sure to bring your questions to that event. All right, I see a question in the chat. Will this PowerPoint be in the follow-up email? We will be putting the link for the recording in the follow-up email, and we can also put the PowerPoint in the follow-up email as well, if that would be helpful. Of course. All right, I'll give about another minute here for questions.
Brianna, do you maybe want to just maybe we could just run through showing people how the survey is going to show up just while we're waiting?
Yeah, definitely. That would be great.
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
So we would really appreciate it if all of you would fill out a workshop evaluation survey at the end of our webinar today. This would really help us improve our future programming. So at the end of the webinar, you will have the option to fill out this survey, and in the survey, there's an option to request a follow-up from either Snohomish Conservation District or from Alex at Snohomish County Surface Water Management to discuss issues specific to your property or to set up a site visit. So when the workshop ends, a leave meeting box is going to pop up on your screen. From there, you need to press OK. Then you'll be directed to this screen here that says you can participate in a survey. And then from there, if you click continue, that is going to bring you to the Google form, and you can fill out the survey from there. Again, we would really appreciate if you fill that out. Thank you. Yes, I see this here in the chat. Yes, so it is the field tour that will be on Saturday. All right, if we don't have any more questions, I just want to say thank you so much from all of us. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here tonight, and we really hope to see you on Saturday as well. Have a good rest of your evening.